implies analyzing of large sources of data that we've discussed in the previous sessions, analyzing data leaks, has a lot of implied ethical dilemmas, which are going to be relevant in our upcoming discussions as well. So this session is really a chance to gain a first-hand experience in the challenges, ethical considerations, and innovations that are shaping the field right now. So Fabienne brings a wealth of experience in journalism innovation, having worked with major newsrooms and NGOs. With a multidisciplinary background, she holds a BA in computational social science, a major in philosophy, and a master's degree in journalism from Stanford University, where she specialized in data journalism, design thinking, and business management. In addition to everything I've just said, and apart from her role at OCCRP, she also trains and coaches journalists worldwide in product thinking and newsroom innovation. So we are absolutely thrilled to have her here, and we're very curious about all the insights that she will share. So without further ado, Fabienne, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here as a guest because I actually was also a lecturer at the data journalism course a couple of years ago. So it's really nice to be back. I couldn't have asked for a better introduction. So let me preface my presentation by saying I am going to talk a little bit about what product management is in a more general sense, to give you a little bit of a background in what that field is, because it's still a little bit new in the journalism space. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at OCCRP, what my team does at OCCRP, and then I am also very happy to talk a little bit about some of the major investigations that we did when it comes to large data-driven work, because that is really the bread and butter of what OCCRP does. I will say I'm not a journalist myself, so feel free to ask me any questions about the journalistic process. I'll answer them to the best of my abilities, but if there's anything that is too in-depth for me to answer and you really want an answer, I can get it from one of my amazing coworkers in the newsroom. So that said, let's talk about product management, because, well, this is me. I don't need to talk about this anymore because I've already been introduced, so you can just look at my face one more time. But let's talk about what is a product. So a product is different from a project. And in journalism, we like to think in projects. Our entire editorial team works in projects. Right now, we have a cool new project coming up that's launching tomorrow, actually. I can't say too much about it, but it has a code name, and the code name is Harvest. And in the past, we also had different projects with different code names, because every big project at our organization has a code name. But a project has a start and a finish. It's defined in time. It's defined in resources, it's defined in scope, it's about a specific topic, it's about a specific thing. We have a launch date, we publish, we reap the rewards, and then we move on to the next thing. So a project is finite, but a product is not. A product is theoretically infinite. The way we like to think about products in journalism is that they are usually ways of distributing our journalism. So for example, a website could be a product. A newsletter is a product. A single podcast episode is not a product, but a podcast imperium is. So if, for example, the Volkskrant, which is a major newspaper in the Netherlands, they have their own podcast division, then that is a product. So a product is a good or service that creates an exchange of value. When we think about websites, apps, newsletters, you go to that website, you go to that app, and you get a good or a service. You get an article, you get a podcast, you get information. And that exchanges value because you read that information or you consume that information and you're more informed about the world, or you feel more capable of taking on your next task. When I was at Stanford, my journalism professor would talk about it in this way. There are 4 information demands. You have the consumer demand for information. That's basically, okay, I want to buy a new phone and I'm going to look online to see the different reviews and compare the specs. And I want to, make sure that I make the right decision before investing a lot of money into a new phone. That's your consumer demand for information. And there are great websites that help you compare and contrast and, make sure you find the option that fits best with your needs. Then there's a professional demand for information. And this is where you are in a certain job and you need information in order to do your job better. Because if you miss that information, you might make a mistake. Or if you miss that information, you're lagging behind your competitors. People are often willing to pay a lot of money for that kind of information. That's why, for example, the Bloomberg terminal is a great example of a prohibitively expensive tool that is so useful for the financial people who work with it that they're willing to pay that absurd price because it gives them an edge over their competitors. There's also the entertainment demand for information. This one is really obvious because we all have Spotify, Netflix, HBO, Amazon Prime. Like, there's all these different tools that provide us with the information that we need to enjoy ourselves, to have a nice time off, to have a nice date with a friend or with your partner. And so this is also a multi-billion-dollar industry. This is, again, really easy to market. But the hardest thing to market, which is what journalism is mostly about, is the citizen demand for information. It's the information that you get, that you are looking for if you're trying to become more informed about the world around you. You want to become a more involved citizen. You want to make a better decision in a voting booth. And that is really hard to market for this very simple reason that I don't need to read that information to benefit from the outcomes. I'm sure most of you have never read an OCCRP story, and I don't blame you because they're very long and they're very difficult to read. So again, I don't blame you. But thousands of assets, like thousands and millions of dollars in assets, have been returned back to their rightful owners because of our investigations. Corrupt politicians have been exposed, regimes have fallen, all because of, or at least partly because of, the investigations that we did. So we've had a huge net positive impact on the world, but none of you have had to read it in order for that impact to happen. And this is the same in a lot of other investigative journalism in particular, is that even though those investigations usually yield a net positive benefit for society, you don't reap the rewards as a newsroom. So product thinking in newsrooms is constantly thinking about how can we connect our audiences better, not only to the products we're already making, the journalism we're already making, but how can we make that product better so that it is better suited for the needs of our audiences. And that is a really interesting challenge that I want to talk a little bit more about today. Because newsrooms are evolving. They're going from content-centric to audience-centric to product-centric. And the product space is overlapping with editorial, technology, audience, and business. And I sometimes add innovation here as well, because a lot of the product work that we do is really innovative. And what that means to be product-centric is that whenever we make new investigations, whenever we start thinking about new project we want to do, that we're not just thinking about the story and how we want to tell the story, but that we're also thinking about who is interested potentially in the story, how many different ways can we slice and dice this investigation to make sure that it resonates with the right audiences, and what is the product that we need to build it in to make sure that it is engaging for them, that it reaches them the right way. Where are they present? What's their favorite modality of consumption? What would they be willing to pay for? And putting that all together in a more strategic way of thinking about journalism. So yeah, solve problems strategically. Data comes into this a lot because we need to understand a lot of different things. We need to understand user needs. We need to understand what their business outcomes are. We need to use all that information to build products that deliver values to audiences and serve the goals of organizations. And so what this means is that I am often looking at droves of data. My data journalism background is so helpful in my day-to-day job, even though it's on a completely different scale and different level. But the skills you learn in data journalism about, analyzing data, gathering it, making sure it's clean, understanding the limitations of what you can and cannot do with data, they are so important in the product space. So even if you come out of this course and thinking like, I don't want to be an investigative data journalist, but I still want to do something in the journalism space, this is a path you could pursue, because I use my data journalism skills nearly every day. So how do I use them? In the product space, we have qualitative and quantitative data. So qualitative data is obviously less easily analyzable with the data journalism techniques that we have on hand, but it's a really interesting and more like messy kind of data to work with. And it comes out of doing interviews, it comes out of meeting with people on the street, it comes out of, talking to people. And the more analytical side of things is where the data journalism chops really come in, when we look at actual analytics data from different tools like Google Analytics or Matomo or what have you, so many different analytics tools. And in recent years, you see that newsrooms have really developed from only looking at page views as their most important metric to also looking much more deeply at really trying to understand audience behavior on their products, on their websites and apps. So for example, at OCCRP, we track what is called a quality read metric, which we developed ourselves. It's a combination of scroll depth, so how deep someone scrolled onto an article, combined with whether the length of time that they spent on that article is appropriate for the depth that they scrolled. Because I can scroll to the bottom of an article, read absolutely nothing, and then if you only track scroll depth, then you'd be like, hey, that person read all the way to the end, but I didn't. So we're tracking both of those things. And whenever someone reaches at least 50% of an article with the appropriate read time, we're like, hey, this person actually committed to reading our long ass stories. That's great. So that's a quality read. And then we combine it with an action, like subscribing to the newsletter, donating to our organization, or sharing the article, and that we call a platinum read. So as a product manager, I'm not only constantly looking at data and trying to interpret what it means, but I'm also trying to communicate it back to our editorial team. And that is actually very similar to thinking about how can you use data from a data journalism product to make a compelling story. Because even though our journalists are really good at doing data journalism, they're not always really good at interpreting audience data in the exact same way. So you still need to be a little bit of a translator between what you're seeing from the data and how to communicate that with your newsroom. And so you can use all the same skills that you have learned in this data journalism course and apply them to product work, which is actually really cool. You also don't need a product title or a product team to apply product thinking in a newsroom. This is a skill that you can use. You can actually start using it today. Like you can start using it when you're thinking about the story that you maybe need to write for this course or any story that you want to write after this. And it's really about, okay, who is interested in this? Why would they be interested in this? What are they going to get out of it? Where is this going to be published, if it's going to be published anywhere? What kind of business model does that outlet have? How does my story fit into that? Should I make conversation with the people who promote it to understand how they're going to promote it and make sure that it hits with the right people? So this is something you can do as an individual unit, as a freelancer, as a student, and in a newsroom. It's a proven set of tools and frameworks that you can use to understand problems, facilitate strategic decision-making, and execute product development. So let's see how journalism skills compare to product skills. Interviewing and reporting is like conducting audience research. Writing a nut graph is like setting goals and clarifying value propositions. Pitching a story is like pitching a product. Managing an editorial calendar is like managing a product roadmap. And owning a beat is similar to maintaining and iterating on a product. So if you're interested in going into journalism after this course and you're like, I found my beat and I want to write all about the housing market in Amsterdam, or I want to write all about the environmental problems in Amsterdam and how the city is trying to work on that. That could be your beat. And then you could see that as a product and think about maybe launching a newsletter or thinking about launching a podcast. And you can use all the product thinking skills to make that product that you're going to make really, really successful. It is a separate function within a news organization. You define goals and success metrics. This is again where data comes in. You apply user research to inform product design, determine and prioritize product features, planning a roadmap, guiding design and development, launching and onboarding users, tracking success of a product and incorporating feedback. So data is a small part of it, but it's a really crucial part of it because without the data skills, it's really hard to be a good product manager. So let's talk a little bit more about what product culture looks like. There are 4 really important elements of product culture. It's collaboration among and across teams. It's about clear and consistent communication, audience-focused goal setting, and a data-guided iterative process. Again, data comes in again and again and again. So again, all your journalism communication skills are going to be really, really important if you want to pursue a product role or a product career. It's really interdisciplinary, which I also really love. So even if right now you're not coming from a journalism background, even if you don't even want to pursue a journalism master's program, you could still, if you're interested in coming back into journalism, this is a really nice way to do it, because it will allow you to use all those skills that you have gathered in different disciplines and different industries and apply them here. So this is a really great entry point into journalism if you ever want to go back into it. Let's talk about product management at OCCRP. First of all, what is OCCRP? We talked a little bit about it, but a lot of people actually don't know what OCCRP is, and I don't blame you, because we have the worst name in the history of journalism organization names, because OCCRP, it doesn't roll off the tongue. It's like really hard to remember. People write it wrong all the time. So again, I don't blame you, but we are a really cool organization. We actually are one of the largest investigative journalism organizations in the world. We have staff across 6 continents. We have 70 member centers. Originally, we were founded in Sarajevo in Bosnia. We are currently headquartered in Amsterdam, but we still have an office in Sarajevo as well. And we really work with people from all over the world. We have member centers in countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, but also in the Pacific. We used to have a member center in Africa. We have people working from the United States, from the UK, from Nigeria, from the Middle East. I have coworkers from Georgia. I have coworkers from Romania. They're literally from all over the world. And that is awesome, because there is nothing more interesting than having such a diverse group of people coming and working together every day. OCCRP is also a major partner in most of the famous investigations you may have heard of, like the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers, all those big ICIJ-led investigations we are also a part of. Actually, the project we're launching tomorrow is a collaborative effort with 30 other newsrooms across Europe and Eastern Europe, and actually even in India. So we're global, and that is really cool. We're mission-driven, we're a nonprofit newsroom, and we have a media development arm to help investigative outlets around the world succeed and serve the public. Those are our member centers. And we're really focused on making a real-world impact, which I think sets us apart from a lot of other investigative journalism organizations or teams, is that most newsrooms will say, we are here to shine a light on these issues, but it's not up to us to make a change. And we are very committed to not only exposing corruption and organized crime, but also trying to eradicate it from the world, which is obviously like a grand mission. But that means that we are focused on making an impact. And we partner with NGOs like Transparency International, for example, to ensure that that impact happens. And you see that in, like I said, the millions of dollars in assets that we've recovered, or the regime changes that we helped enable. We fly under the radar, but we do have a big impact on the world, and that is really cool. And yeah, we do also a lot of work with data, and I want to talk a little bit more about that from a product perspective as well. So I'm the head of journalism products, and that means that we focus on 4 things within OCCRP. There's our website, which we have relaunched in August 2024, where we completely overhauled the backend, front end, and the CMS. There's audience engagement, where we're actively working on getting the newsroom to be more audience-centric. We've developed audience segments and used them to tailor our journalism, which I will talk a little bit more about in a second. And the interactives. This is our most famous OCCRP product, because usually our big investigations include an interactive. These are news products in their own right, and they're used by thousands of people across the world. This is where that data trove that we usually build our investigations on, leaks, massive data sources, meets the outside world, because we will try to find a way to make that data work for the end user. Because oftentimes the data that we get is really unstructured. We have a whole separate R&D team, the research and data team, who do nothing else but try to clean up that data, make sure that editors can ask questions about it. They will become experts on that data set, but it's really hard to release that wholesale to the public. So what we try to do from a journalism product's perspective is think about, okay, we have all this data, we have these really cool insights. Obviously, we're going to put them in a story, but there's a lot of stuff that we can't put in the story, but that we still think is valuable for people to see. And that is when we make an interactive. They often have the form of a data set, like a database, where you can search for keywords, and usually you'll see like it's a name of a politician and it's maybe assets that they have in different countries. And I'll close down this presentation in a little bit to walk you through a couple of real life data sets that we have made, like interactively made. But we're constantly trying to think of what is the best form that we can present this data in. So it's also data viz skills, like how do we present this data in the best possible way? How can we make sure that it's usable for the people that we want this, that we want to consume this? So that is a product skill, not just a data viz skill. And it's really cool to incorporate all of that in these big projects. The last thing that we're focused on is emerging products. So this includes stuff that is not really new for anyone, like YouTube. I put that there because it's new for us. We have a YouTube channel, but we're still like figuring out how to make it the most useful for us. So for us, that is new. Another project we're working on is a news service where we want to create sort of like a wire service for our news content and disseminate it to interested member centers and other parties. We might create APIs over time to unlock our data sets in an even more structured way for maybe corporate clients who are interested in that kind of work. So all of that is part of experimentation, thinking of new products, thinking of new ways to get our stories out there in a better way. And so I want to briefly focus on the website because this has been a massive undertaking and I'm really proud of the fact that we actually pulled this off. I'm not going to include photos or screenshots of what our website used to look like because it was horrible and it looks like it was still stuck in the 90s. So if you really, really want to see it, you can use, the archive and take a look at what our website was like in the past. It was horrible. We updated it in August last year and I'm really proud of what we did. It's still work in progress. We're still like pushing new features and thinking of new ways to better present our stories to the audiences, but we've come a really long way. And so one of the things that we focused on with our redesign is that we want our website to look professional. We want it to look like the global, fresh organization that we are. And so right now one of the things that I think we can still do better is our menu, actually, our navigation, just to point out something that we're currently working on. Because as you can see, there's so many different menus that we have. There's a burger menu, there's a horizontal bar menu, there's some stuff at the top there's some stuff over at the right part of the website. And so that's really confusing for users. And we've done analysis into our data, our usage data, to see how people are using our navigation. And what we found is that actually no one uses the top menu at all. Everyone goes straight to the burger menu. So we're using that data-informed, data-informed insight to guide us into making a better navigation moving forward. So stay tuned. We'll have a better navigation probably in end of March. So I want to go out of this presentation for a second and actually go to our live website to talk a little bit more about our big investigations. So I think one of the really cool ones that we did last year was Dubai Unlocked. So you'll find that our interactors are often on a separate page. So I'll go here. And this story was about dirty money finding a home in Dubai real estate. We got a leak from, I don't know exactly where it came from, but it was a huge leak into all these different people who have properties in Dubai. So we decided to create a scrolly telling, which by now is, I think, a pretty common feature. And it's actually a really cool video that's not loading correctly. But at the bottom of this, look, data viz. At the bottom of this, we have our actual database that you can look at. So the way we organize this is you can search for region, category, different types of people. For example, politically linked. These are PEPs, or politically exposed people, who are really important often in our investigations. And you can see the country they're coming from. You can click on their profile and it shows you who this person is, and also where they have properties. So we have some information available sometimes about what kind of building it is, what it owns, and if they're still the owner of the property. Now, this looks very sleek and like really cool, but I will tell you that this project was hell. It was one of the most terrible things that we ever had to do. And I'll give you a little bit of an insight into why it was so terrible. So first of all, from our perspective, when we get the information that the editorial team wants to do a interactive, we know that we need to get really early into, okay, what is the data you have? What is the information you want to tell? How do you want to show it? Like, what's the story here? Because we need that information to understand from a design perspective what is possible. And so early on, everyone agreed that we didn't want to do a database again because these are terrible to make, and no one really wanted to do it. But then we got into this whole fight about whether or not we could actually prove the stuff that was in the data. Because here's the thing, we get that data set, but that data set was already 2 years old at that point, because the leaks that we get are usually older. They're not like from a month ago. They're usually like from a couple of years ago. So first of all, our R&D team will have to verify, are these people actually still the owner of that specific apartment? Because if not, then maybe it's not relevant to put them in the database because they owned the money, but they're not still the owner. Or we have to clarify that they're not the owner anymore. So there's a lot of extra work that comes on top. The other thing you see here is the current prices or the current value of these apartments. That data was also obviously old because it was an old data set. So again, our R&D team had to, again, go into all the financial data in Dubai's property and see, like, what's the current listing value of this specific property? How can we correct it for inflation? Is there anything that we need to like check? A lot of fact checking involved in getting this data clean and ready for publication. There's also an interesting political thing going on between where editorial sometimes wants to say something that according to the R&D team is not possible. So we'll have these little fights about, but I think you should be able to say this. And then the R&D team's like, no, actually we cannot. And then, so this took forever. All the while, we still had no idea what they were still, what they wanted to build. So you can imagine that this was a very last minute project. And this is a little secret, but I'll tell you this because we're, in safe territory. But an hour before this project was supposed to go live, we were still making changes to the database, which is not something you want to do ever at all. So this looks nice and neat and clean, but it was not. And this just goes to show that, especially in big international operating organizations with a lot of partner projects where you get these big leaks that you then need to turn into something that you can actually tell a story about, that's not easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest things that I've ever seen happen, is the way that we work with all these different partners to get these compelling stories out there and tell a really cool data-driven story. So if you're currently in this class and you're like, shit, this is hard, it is still hard if you're a professional journalist and you work at one of the biggest organizations in the world. So maybe that helps, maybe it doesn't help, I don't know. But this is the truth and the reality of working with big data in investigations. But I will say that I'm really proud of the end result and that it looks really cool. One of the other really famous project that we did a little bit less recently, but still relevant, is the Russian asset tracker. So this was actually launched right before, like on the day of the invasion into Ukraine. And so this was really, really popular at the time. And we're still updating this database actually. So whenever we find new information, it gets put into this database. And here you can find all Russians, all their assets, like where is their wealth coming from? Where has it gone to? You can see the value of their assets. You can see their occupation. We also put a little reason for inclusion here. You can browse their assets, you can view them. This was a hell of a job to make, again, because we have to get photos, we have to get the listing value, we need to figure out if they still own it, when it's updated last. So there's a lot going into these kind of databases, but we do reap the benefits of it because this was one of our most popular projects, aside from the Pandora Panama Papers ones. So there is real world value into turning big data into really cool stories and really cool searchable databases. And it's awesome to work on thinking about how to make them even more attractive to users and how to make them even better. And I'm usually known for talking a little bit less long than I intended to. And I feel like I've reached a natural conclusion to what I wanted to tell you. But I'm sure if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take those questions. So thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. I was thinking through the entire presentation how perfectly paced it was to the stage that of the course that we're in right now. And you also anticipated very well the last sessions that we're going to have. So this was the perfect segue that we needed to have this course. I already have a lot of questions in mind, but I will also invite the students to raise their hand or to write them in the chat. And in the meantime, I can maybe get the ball rolling with one of the key things that I was wondering.
Sure.
In your position, I assume you come across a lot of interesting insights about the audience segments that you interact with. And I was wondering, first of all, because there seems to be a lot of reverse engineering into how you operationalize each audience segment. And I'm also wondering how you, what sort of trends you found or trends that you found interesting in some of the audience segments.
Yeah, I thank you for that question. That's wonderful because I didn't really talk in depth about our audience research. So we have three major audience segments. We have our professional audience. It's actually our biggest group. And it makes sense because, again, if you look at OCRP's work, we are very in depth. We're very niche. And the people who love us are people who work in due diligence for banks, they work in prosecution, and they use our stories to make business decisions. So that's a really big group. There's also a group of people who work at NGOs and who use our work to advocate for better laws, better structures, and they also have their own needs. And actually, I just did some research into that, so I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then we have two other groups, the entertainment group. This is because true crime is one of the biggest entertainment genres globally. We all love all the murder videos and so we're trying to capitalize on that by turning our investigations that are, like I said, a little bit harder to get through into really engaging video material. That's what we're trying to do on YouTube currently. And the last group is what we call the local audiences, because I mentioned we have member centers in countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. These are traditionally countries where independent investigative journalism is really hard to do because you're automatically an enemy of the regime. You're threatened, your life is threatened, you maybe have to leave the country. And so we try to be that organization that supports independent journalism in those regions. We provide financial support for our editors who work on the ground. We give them security, protection, training, money, whatever they need to continue to publish there. And so our aim for that audience is to be that outlet that tells people what's really going on, where everything else is mostly propaganda. And so when it comes to trends, these are obviously very distinct audiences with really different needs. So our professional audience is, we know that they're the most loyal readers of our website. And so we're trying to cater our website more around them. And we're using different products to look at those different audiences. And I just mentioned those impact stakeholders. I did a round of interviews with them recently. And one of the things that we figured out is that they don't read our stories, as in they go to our story, but then they open the search box and they look for the very specific thing that they need. They go to that paragraph, they copy it into a Google Doc. And so you can actually see this behavior in analytics where we see people scroll to a certain section, highlight the paragraph, open a different tab, because you can see when people go away from your page, come back, scroll down, find another paragraph, highlight it, put it somewhere else. And so this is really interesting audience behavior that is, for us, from a product perspective, like, okay, how can we make their lives easier? How can we maybe make a different article that just focuses on those key elements that they need so that they don't have to go through the 10,000 word article and do like a search every time, but that we deliver something that is exactly what they need at that moment. So that's one of the trends that we've seen. Another thing that we've noticed with the entertainment audience is that we launched a really cool video, I might say, about a Serbian slaughterhouse. I don't know if anyone has seen Fargo, but you know, where the meat grinder and the people, well, that gang did that thing, like, but in real life. So it's a really gruesome story, but it's also really interesting. And we showed how that gang was associated with the Serbian government and how they used that gang to get rid of people that they wanted to get rid of. And so we found that local audiences were really keen to comment on that video, to point out things that we missed or things that they thought were wrong. And so they felt really compelled to tell us their stories. And that's another trend that we're seeing, that these local audiences are really interested and excited about major outlets covering their stories, because in the West, usually these stories go unnoticed. And so shining a spotlight on them and giving them that podium is really beneficial for these audiences, and they want to jump on that opportunity to get into a conversation with us and talk more about their experiences. And so that's another thing that we're trying to think about. How can we foster that conversation even more? So just a couple of examples. I see questions in the thread on the side. I'm like, I need to get to those questions. But this is an awesome question, so thank you so much for asking.
No worries. I can also just compile some of the questions, because I think they do touch similar topics.
Yes.
So very, very interesting. Just a follow up to this, because we discussed in one of our sessions, and actually some students pointed out the fact that, okay, we're working with these large amounts of data, and there are questions about that in the chat, which we'll get to in a second. But then we also aim to make that easier for the audience to engage with, right? So there is kind of this inherent tension between trying to create a better literacy for the audience versus you, in terms of product management, trying to make their lives easier at the same time. So how do you also take the literacy of the audience into account?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So obviously those professional users will have a much higher data literacy than people who are in local. I mean, obviously a local audience member can still be a very highly data literate person, but on average, there is going to be a gap. And so what we're trying to do is think more consciously, like, who are we selling this to? Not literally, but like, who are we promoting this to? Is our database going to be for the professional users, or are we hoping that our local audience members will also get something out of it? So in the case of Dubai Unlocked, for example, one of the things that we did that you don't see in the database is that we highlighted a couple of profiles that we thought were especially interesting and made separate articles about them. So in that case, we're basically saying, okay, you might not feel like you have the data chops or the skills or even the need to go really deep into this data set, but we know that since you're a local audience member of this in this country, you will probably be interested in this and this person. So we've created those spin-off articles and promoted them separately. I think one of the things that I learned while working as a data journalist and as a product manager later on is that my understanding of the data is often so different from people who've never seen that data before. And it's really hard to get into that mindset because you have spent so much time with that data. You are so familiar with it by now that it's really hard to get into that beginner's mindset of someone who doesn't know what's in there, doesn't know what to look for, which is why it's really important to bring people from inside your newsroom, but like further away from the investigation, into the conversation, especially if they're like local reporters, and say, hey, if I tell you that I have this data set and you wanted to tell interesting stories to your community members, what would you focus on? What do you think matters to them? And then it's fine if that means that they will never even see that database as a whole, because that's not what you're serving them with. So yes, you take that data literacy into account in thinking about, do they even need access to the whole data set? Or would it suffice to give them like a profile or a set of 5 profiles that are relevant to their country, relevant to their interests, basically? And so in the past, we didn't do as good a job of differentiating our products in this way, but it's something that we've been doing more since I joined the products team, because I feel that it's really important to meet your audiences where they're at. So I think to translate that into like a student newsroom perspective is, if you're making this story, you probably have your audience in mind, and it's probably too wide. You're probably looking at your audience from a too homogeneous perspective. So I would challenge everyone to think more granularly, like, okay, I think this is my audience, but what different subgroups might be in this audience, and how might they come into contact with my story or with my data in a different way? And not even making all those different products because you might not have time, but at least consciously thinking about, if I had time and resources, what could I make that fits their needs perfectly and also fits their level of data literacy? That's a really cool like thought exercise to do.
That's actually great. And I think the follow-up question is kind of in the chat already, because you're presenting this as is there's one brain that is coordinated all of this thought process, right? So how you would approach it. But obviously in your organization there are many people and many various departments that play into that. So a question would be, who decides if there is a story in the data, and how do you then start to distribute tasks? You already mentioned that some of them are not legally okay to be shared, which is also a question of how you navigate that. And who decides like what's the story in the data, who puts it in the actual journalistic piece, and what do you do with that?
That's a great question because it's so layered and so complicated. At the end of the day, we have an editor-in-chief who oversees all our major projects. And they're ultimately in charge of saying, this is okay to go, this is not okay to go. But we work from the ground up. So the people who touch the data first are the R&D team, and they will do their own independent investigation into the data. Like, what can we say? How clean is the data? What is okay to talk about? What is probably not okay to talk about? And they will also field questions from different reporters. Because since our investigations are often global, a lot of people from different countries will have an interest in that data, especially if one of their countries is mentioned. And so they might ask the R&D team, like, what can you find on this particular person? Or can you find anything on this particular organization? Or, this group that we know is active in that region. And so there will be a continuous conversation between the R&D team and the reporters to understand what's in the data, what's available, cross-reference it with the existing knowledge that the reporter already has about that person. And so as a group, they then come to an understanding of what's interesting, what's relevant, what's new. And then there's a core editor team who will make the final decision on, these are the stories that we're going to pursue. These are the stories that we think are most relevant or most impactful to tell. And that's when they actually get to writing. This happens quite late, I will say. Like for the Harvest project that we're launching tomorrow, about a month ago, they weren't sure yet which stories they were going to produce. They were still looking into the data. So this goes on for a very long time. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but that is a thing that happens. So once they get into the story like process, they write drafts, they go to fact checking, and they often go to fact checking 2 or 3 times because we have a very rigorous fact checking process. Everything that you see published has been checked and checked again to make sure that it's something we can say, that it's legally okay to say. So all our language is also checked by lawyers. We're sued very often because if powerful people are hit where it hurts, then they want to hurt you back. So we get sued very often, which is okay. I'd rather we get sued than that someone gets murdered. But that means that we have to be really, really correct about everything that we write. So that goes into writing, goes into fact checking. Obviously, we try to also make it easy to read. So it's not a completely like business report, but actually something that a layperson could also read if they wanted to. And what's really new is that right now we are also thinking, as soon as we know which stories are going to be produced, we're also thinking about who might be interested in those stories. How can we create spin-off content that is relevant for them? So in this case, we are publishing for the Harvest project tomorrow, we're publishing 10 social media videos that are about different aspects of the project, different aspects of the stories that we're gonna like distribute on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, with the goal of getting different people's perspectives on that information that we're sharing, but also making sure that audiences who would otherwise never read our stories because they're not in their field of interest still come into contact with that information. And we're also launching a mini documentary, which is then again like another type of spin-off content. So the process is very multifaceted, and it's I wouldn't say it's ideal, but I think it's the best thing you can do with the amount of partners that we have and the amount of people that are working on a project like this. Yeah.
I think this was very useful to gain this perspective into how many skills they're actually like merging in this sort of collaborative project. So just to sum up in my own mind, so you have the legal technical professions in the R&D, you have the more traditional journalists that make sense of the findings there. Then you have the product managers such as yourself that try to parse the story for different audiences. And then you also have content creators that create stories for the different audiences that you find.
Yep.
So that's how many people are involved in this sort of project?
Well,
Ballpark.
let me see. I think so. Just from OCCRP, I have a Slack group here with 43 people. So those are mostly from editorial, some product people, and then we have another, I want to say 10 people on the product side, like the design side, are also working on this. So over 50 people just from OCCRP, because there are also 30 partners, right? So I want to say this easily gets over 100 people if you count everyone.
So like as a thought process for everyone here, it would take all of us in this call right now to produce one story over a long period of time.
Yep, basically.
So that being said, and I think that would be a great ending question for the students who I think could get a bit overwhelmed at the amount of skills that are actually involved in this process. What would be, in your experience, some of the ones that they should be most, let's say, keen on developing throughout like this course and throughout this path, not necessarily towards becoming the investigative journalist, because as you said, there are many variations of the industry, but I do feel like you, with your multifaceted experience, kind of use the same skills in different parts.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely, you hit the mark there. Yeah. So when it comes to my own data journalism experience, what I love to do but rarely use now is my Python coding skills. I mean, if you're going deep into research or investigative journalism or actual coding, that is helpful. But in my case, I'm a little bit more removed from that. So I don't think it's not helpful to do, but it depends on the career path you want to take. But what I do use all the time is my general data literacy skills. I can assess if a data set is clean. I can assess, okay, what is something I can and cannot say based on this data? I can do my own basic calculations. I know how to work a spreadsheet. I use spreadsheets all the time.
Thank you.
All the time.
We did not ask her to say that.
No, this is true. I am not paid. I'm not a paid actor. No, I use spreadsheets all the time because they're so versatile and you can do everything in a spreadsheet that you can do elsewhere. And yes, I love Python and yes, I love coding, but day to day, the spreadsheet is what I turn to again and again and again. And just knowing what the limitations are, what you can do with data, knowing to ask the right questions to that data, that is so much more important than any technical skill, because you can pick up that technical skill whenever you want. But that basic understanding of how data works, what is feasible, what isn't, what are good questions to ask, when to be skeptical, that is, I think, the most foundational skill that you need to have. And I know that the question in the chat also asked about, what would be useful to start building a portfolio. And in this case, I would say focus on not necessarily on building cool vizzes, because yes, that is cool. But again, you will find that there's a separation between people who make vizzes and people who do the actual like deep dive into the data, oftentimes in newsrooms. So it depends on your interest. If you're like, I want to make the cool vizzes, go in that direction. But if you're like, I want to really focus on that investigative data part, you don't really need to become super proficient in viz making, but you do need to become super proficient in showing editors that you don't make mistakes, because data feels more factual than anything else, even though that is not true. So we have an even higher standard to prove that what we're saying is correct. And so getting familiar with making a data dictionary, understanding, like showing your work, making that into a neat little package and putting that on a portfolio website when it comes to that kind of work is so much more important than showing that you can make a cool viz. Because if the data underneath that viz is not correct, then I don't trust you.
Yeah, well said. That's again the perfect moment to have this lecture in the path of our course. So until everyone else kind of processes and lets that sink in and tries to see if there are any unanswered questions so far, I would like to thank you, Fabian, for this amazing presentation and for all of your insights. It would be great if you could share the slides with us. I'm just going to send you my email address. You can send them there in any format you prefer. And if there are no other questions, all that's left for me to do is to thank everyone for participating. Thank you again so much for all of the insights. And yeah, I think that brings us to a great starting point for next week when we're discussing about AI in journalism and then about OSINT, which kind of hits all of the things that you already mentioned. So we already all prepped for the last week of our course.
Happy to be of service. Thank you so much for the opportunity and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much and see you guys next
Bye-bye.
week. Bye.